Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here today, and welcome to the third installment in our series of LinkedIn Live sessions, in which we're exploring the ways that payment leaders can unlock the power of connected payments in order to grow and differentiate their business. If you've joined us previously, great to have you here. And if it's your first time watching, thank you so much for joining us. So my name's Emilie Gauthier, and I'm a product marketing manager here at checkout.com. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Grégoire Delpit, who is our head of strategy. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Emilie. Thanks a lot for having me.
It's great to have you here. Greg, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and your role at checkout.com?
Yep, more than happy to do it. So my name is Greg. As you can see with my accent, I'm French. So I grew up in France. I started my career in private equity, worked in Africa, worked in France, then started a company named Process Out, which was also operating in the payment industry, and was acquired by Checkout 1 year ago, already 1 year ago. Time is flying. And I'm now leading strategy at Checkout.
Great, thanks for that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the issues that merchants face with false declines and the steps they can take to remedy this problem to capture more sales at the checkout. But just before we dive in, a few housekeeping items. So the session will last for around 15 minutes. And we really encourage anyone who's watching to ask questions and to join in the discussion in the comments section below. So with that, we'll get started. So Greg, our research with Oxford Economics finds that the US, the UK, Germany, and France lose a staggering $20.3 billion at the checkout each year due to false declines. And not only that, but a significant amount of that money, nearly $13 billion, merchants are basically handing over to their competitors. So these are pretty staggering numbers, and they don't even consider the intangible implications of false declines, things like the negative long-term impact on the brand or future loss of sales. So why is this happening? Why are merchants so badly impacted by false declines?
So that's the big question of the day. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big and important topic that we're going to discuss today. I think before we jump into, I would say, the core of the topic, let's be sure we align on, what is false decline and, what is scoring and how things are working, because if we do that, then we can have, I think, a more productive discussion. So to your point, false decline is basically transactions that are wrongly rejected by the scoring system of one of the players in the value chain. Because for people who are payment experts, they know that, when you process a payment, there is different players involved. But for people who don't know about payments, most of the time they don't know that there is different actors, after you click on pay. So those players, they have scoring system, and those scoring system basically, they're going to either in an automatic way or in a static way, so basically rule-based. They're going to score the transaction to take a decision, which is to accept and reject the transaction. And the way basically they're working is they score based on the data they can collect, and so that basically the merchant and the different providers are going to send to the system. So we have to keep things very simple. We're talking about basically a system which based on some data that you're sending, depending on the technology, either a filter system or a data and algorithm system, is going to take a decision or to give a score that's going to lead to a decision. And the decision is I accept or I reject the transaction. The system is basically made to check two things for your bank. It's made to say, first of all, is the person who is trying to pay my cardholder? Is it my customer, or is it a fraudster? And the second one is my cardholder able to pay for this transaction? Because basically the bank has to then send the money. And so that's the purpose of the scoring system. If we look at the good aspect of the problem, we've managed, and the industry managed to create system that at scale can score lots of transactions with a pretty high rate of success. Now, if we want to be picky, and we have to be picky because there is lots of money at stake, there is still a strong percentage, can be 3, can be 20%, depending of the geography, the country, the type of customer that you have, that are going to be rejected. And among those transactions, lots of them are going for, I would say, wrong reason, because the system is not perfect. So that's kind of what we're talking today. So Then if we think about why this is happening, then it's basically going to depend of either the quality of the data that you're going to send, and so basically the ability for the scoring system to properly score, or it's going to come from the quality of the scoring system, so basically the tool you're using. And so I think when you try to understand this, you have to understand, am I using the right tool? Yes, no. Am I feeding the right tool, or am I feeding the tool with the right data? Right, no. And based on that, do I have the expected results? Because as are we going to discuss in the presentation, there is not one magical number. It's more, what do you want to achieve? What's your objective? And based on that, what's your strategy? And so what should be the KPI that you track?
Okay. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, sorry. So I know it's a bit a long answer, but then, I was trying to, so that's basically why this is happening. And then, if you think about the second question is like, why merchant are so badly impacted? I think it's basically because most of the time when you discuss about online sectors or, digital segment, just because things goes very fast and most of the time grow super fast. And so, you're going to see some merchant that operate with basically system they implement at the beginning of their story, and that for some reason, because payment is not the first thing you think to optimize, they forget to scale it, and then the numbers become pretty big.
Absolutely. Thanks for that explanation, Greg. That's really helpful. You referred to the tools that merchants use, and I guess what's interesting to me is that there's a risk that merchants are actually inadvertently compounding this problem if they're using overzealous fraud prevention strategies, or if they're using tools that aren't flexible enough to do what they need them to do. So that actually kind of suggests that there may be a large number of merchants who might be unaware of how big an issue false declines actually are. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement, or that's a fact, which is basically you have some companies where you have payment experts, and like in those companies, people are going to be aware, and you will see those people spending lots of time trying to, I would say, first of all, assess the amount of money which is at stake. I'm going to discuss that a bit later, how you can do that. Then, try to understand if they're using the right tool and if they're properly, I would say, using the tool. So for large merchants where you have payment experts, they are aware, but that's only a small part of I would say, the word and the transaction. The big part is still in SMB and, I would say, large one where you don't have, I would say, those team of experts. And so where most of the time people, when they think about payment, they just think about, oh, I need to implement one provider and then it's done. And they don't really look at, what's behind the provider. And so they don't really see those figures, and they don't realize that maybe they have 3 to 5% of their transaction. And so there's potentially of their revenues that are, left somewhere on the table.
Right. And so do you think that false declines are a problem that will escalate for merchants as more and more commerce moves online as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, we're seeing lots of reports and studies that highlight that e-commerce fraud is on the rise. So will that drive merchants to be even more cautious?
So yes, I think there is no direct connection, with this. It's more, I would say, an impact, which is based on two things. The first point is that fraud, and thus the chargeback ratio. That's how you would basically put a KPI on this one. Is directly used by most of the, I would say, scoring system to estimate the risk profile of a merchant, and thus basically, it has an impact on the comfort that the bank or the system used as when it's going to accept or decline a transaction. So the more you're going to have fraud, the more you're going to be in a sector or an industry where you're going to have fraud, the more you're going to be impacted by default, I would say. The second thing is that I would say it's that I don't want to say, or I don't want to feel, that, oh, they're not expert, but it's kind of the reality that the people who are now transitioning, I would say, due to COVID online, they're people who used to mainly work in the physical world. And so, they're entering online because it's for them an option to save or to grow their business. So that's a great news that, they do that, and that's a good idea. But when you come from the physical world, the dynamic at, I would say, the point of sales are very different to the one you have at the checkout page. And just a simple example, like if you're in a shop and your card is rejected, instantly you're going to retry because like you're in front of the person, you know, and you're just like going to retry. And if it doesn't work, you have a human connection with this person to say, oh, maybe you can try another card, or, you know, maybe I'm going to try to, or maybe you have cash, or so the merchant in that case has lots of opportunities to basically manage the retry and manage basically the failure. When you're online, and I'm sure you know it happened to all of us, you're not going to do that. No one like, you know, is going, like your computer is not going to say, hey, you know, Greg, that would be nice if you try another card. You just like fed up and you left. So I think you have the first one, which is like the direct one, which is the impact of the ratio on the scoring. And you have the indirect one, which is, I would say, just the consumer habit that you don't act the same way in a store and, you know, on an online website.
Definitely. And I guess the real risk there is not just that they won't complete that transaction, but they might not return to that merchant again, which is, I suppose, what we're all trying to avoid here. It sounds like it's this really careful balance to be struck between risk and returns that merchants need to look at achieving. So what advice would you offer to merchants to help them solve this problem so that they can reduce the impact of false declines, but they can still keep fraudsters out?
Yep. So, I mean, so it's a complex topic. I'm going to try to simplify it as, you know, I'm going to try to simplify it. But if you have any question, feel free to ask, of course. So let's start with the beginning. I think the first step is you need to map things properly. Like, you know, you need to basically understand what is the system you're using. Like, who are the different players? Like, who is your PSP? Who is the acquirer? Who is the scheme or the payment method you're using? Who is the issuing bank, you know, behind this? And you need to understand how those different players are scoring the transaction. And how basically based on the parameters and the setup that you have, how they're going to receive that and score that. That's the very first important point. It's a pretty long job, you know, if you want to do it properly, because you really need to try to understand how each system is going to receive that and how each other system is going to impact what, you know, the other system in the chain receive. The second step that you need is like when you have a clear map, you need to look at the performance of basically your system and you need to benchmark it because, you know, it's a nonsense to just give a figure without linked it to a geography, a sector, a customer profile, you know, a transaction profile, because, you know, the amount of the transaction is going to. So you need to basically look at the performance of the system and benchmark, and based on that, make your assessment. Like, you know, am I good or not? Is 95%, you know, for this geography a good figure? Is it not? And that's where basically, you know, talking with your PSP, and so people like us check out, is something where we can help you understand, like in this industry, in this geography. So that's the second. So step one is basically you map. Step two is you understand, you analyze, and you benchmark. And step three is you try to uncover the reason of the rejects. So like, you know, you take all your rejects, and my recommendation would be you try to bucket them and try to understand, you know, okay, what are the ones where basically I think, first of all, they were rejected for right reason. You know, it seems obvious that it's a fraud. And then you take all the other one, the one that you think, oh, that they've been rejected, I'm not sure about why. And then you try to understand, because there is mainly three reasons why, you know, they could have been rejected. The first one is like technical issues. Like, you know, for some reason, I send the data, the scoring system doesn't use it properly, or, you know, doesn't receive it. Those one, most of the time, they are the easiest one to settle. The second thing you try to understand, is it like an economic assessment? Like, you know, if my card holder has no money anymore in the bank account, or if I can pay for that, then same, there is a reason why the transaction was rejected. So it's not a fraud, but, you know, and so then there is also option for that, you know, buy now pay later, split payments, lots of things that you can do, or lots of options that you can offer to your customer. And then you have the last one, which is the false negative based on the risk assessment and scoring. And so when you have those one and you're able to analyze and benchmark, then you start working with the different providers and potentially up to the issuing bank, so you can understand with them, why it fell. Like we've done that recently with a very big merchant in France, where we've basically been and talked with different banks to understand how their model was scoring, and what was the reason why we see things differently. So the first thing I think is really by making, I would say, your homework on this one, and that's definitely something where I would say at checkout we can help, and where people, I would say, in your PSP can help. The second thing is you define your priorities, because when you think about the checkout page and payment and stuff like that, you can basically draw a triangle, and you put on one side payment performance, so authorization, all those elements. Then you put on one other side like basically cost, so how much are you going to pay each time you process a transaction, and thus how many providers, scoring system, and all things you're going to use. And the last one is conversion. How much friction are you ready to create in the funnel? Because in a way, if you want no fraud and you're ready to pay, I would say, a high price for your transaction, it's easy. You take all the providers, you put all the security system, and then you sell everything. But no one is going to buy on your website. So you see, I think that the first one is really you try to understand the system and everything. The second thing is you try to understand what's important for you, and based on that, you define your strategy, and then you iterate and refine until the moment you reach the KPI you want to achieve.
Great, thanks for that, Greg. That's really helpful. So I'd encourage any viewers who have any questions at this stage to pop them into the comment box now. This is clearly a huge topic, and one that we will continue to address and to solve for merchants. If we don't have time to answer any questions today, we'll be sure to answer them in our blog, so please do subscribe to our content. And I would also encourage everyone watching to download our ebook to get more insight on the topics we've discussed today around balancing risk and returns, and a link for that is in the chat below as well. So thanks so much for joining me today, Greg. It's been really insightful.
Thank you very much. I think my final recommendation, because we discussed, a bit, I would say, very fast of this topic, is it's not that complex to start. I know we discussed a lot of things, and I discussed a complex value chain and stuff like that, but like the first question is really easy. Is like you just look at how many transactions fail, and basically you ask your contact at your PSP about do you think it's on par with the benchmark or not? Then you discuss with a few peers, I would say, in your industry, and based on that, you're going to be able to quickly assess the amount of money that is on the table. Then if you're on par with the market and the segment, depending on the amount, it's up to you to go and work more to try to be above, I would say, your peers, but at least you should be on par with you have on the segment. And what we see is that the impact of doing that can be between 1 to 10% of your transactions, depending of basically your geography, your segment, your customer profile. So it's really worth, I would say, spending 10 minutes on the phone with your PSP, just asking about the figures and the reason, and if it's on par with the benchmark. Thanks a lot.
Great takeaway, great starting point for sure. So we will be back next Thursday for part 4 in this series, where our head of commercial for North America, Bradley Riss, will discuss how merchants can better understand their customers and then build tailored checkout experiences to convert. So we'll see you all then. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to you again, Greg.
And thanks a lot for having me. See you soon.
Cheers.